Welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alyssa Globe, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott Hayward, and our co-host, Jonathon Van Maren, joins us once again this week. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Jonathon. Appreciate it.
When we had Andrew Lawton on, I said, welcome. Great for you guys to be here. And then there's a very long pause, and that almost just happened again. So
we're just also very, very polite.
So how's it going, Jonathon? We haven't spoken to you since before you went to Washington. So fill us in on that. Tell us how your life is going. How are your kids? Just tell us everything.
That's a lot of stuff in one shot. So Washington, D.C. was obviously phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I got there the day after Roe v. Wade fell, so the corpse was still fresh, and the protests were raging strong. It was really, really cool. We went straight to the Supreme Court. There was a massive protest in front of it. After all the many, many pro-life protests in front of the court, it was pretty cool to be part of a pro-abortion one, because I didn't, of course, share that I was pro-life with all those who were present. And some poor feminist offered me a granola bar because she thought I was on her team. So that was pretty fun.
Did you eat it?
I did eat the granola bar. It kind of felt like having my cake and eat it too, right? Like Roe v. Wade fell, and then a feminist fed me, and it was a pretty good day.
It wasn't like a vegan granola bar or anything like that, was it?
It tasted a bit like Victory, to be honest. So I wasn't totally sure what the brand was.
Victory tastes so chocolatey and so grainy.
Yeah. So there was a ton of pro-life leaders just in town for the celebration, so that was pretty cool. On Monday there was a Roe is Dead party, and there was all like Mark Harrington of Created Equal. There was all kinds of people there, 5 or 6 different groups, and then we did activism throughout the week. I did a couple of talks at a pro-life training camp, and then we did Choice Chain out in front of the White House with the Created Equal tour and stuff like that. And then I had a speaking engagement in the Netherlands for a couple of days, and I was there right in the middle of the farmer protest, so that was kind of neat to see. There was blockading off overpasses and stuff, and they let us through because they weren't mad at us, of course.
Did you see tires burning?
No. What I saw was a massive barbecue in the median with a lot of open drinking and cops skulking around and music blasting. But that was about it very much reminded me of the Freedom Convoy, actually. Like just a whole bunch of people who were really pumped to be with others who agreed with them in their frustration. And it was mostly about the tunes and the beer, from what I could tell. And then I went to Spain for a week after that. And so this actually makes it sound like I'm not around my kids much, but that's a very small part.
I went to Spain, and I think I'm pretty sure it was in August, and it was so incredibly hot that the locals were pouring buckets of water out of their windows. And we were with World Youth Day, so we were like a million people, and we were all running towards the window to get even an inch of water splashed at us. People were throwing because it was
47.
So hot.
It was 47 degrees.
Yeah.
In Cordoba, ridiculous. And all of the lounges where you sit out and have a beer have these massive mist machines that every 3 seconds would just blast you with perspiration. But it was pretty neat anyways.
Yeah, Spain is pretty cool. Did you try the cervosa and what's the main it's like potatoes and this cream sauce? I can't remember what it's called. But did you try any local Spain food?
I had lots of sangria.
Okay, that's good.
He just drank his food. That's what he did.
No, mostly actually I had their seafood. So the octopus in Barcelona is phenomenal.
Okay. Well, Scott, how was your weekend? Can you top that? Spain.
No, I can't top that. You know what? I don't even remember what we really did this weekend. I think it was just kind of laying low, just spending time with my wife and my child. My wife goes back to work. She's a paramedic. She goes back to work in a couple of weeks in September. So we're just trying to kind of lay low. We have some company coming over and trying to get into a routine. It's my daughter's first birthday coming up, so getting ready for that. But yeah, it was just an uneventful weekend. But you know what? I've had so many eventful weekends.
It's true.
I think, I'm due for an uneventful one. What about you?
Yeah.
Did you paint anything in your house again?
Yeah, I painted my
There it
sister's
is.
room.
Okay.
She goes back in Alberta. You go back to school at the end of August, which is
I know.
just so awful. Like it doesn't
Ridiculous.
seem right. It's still summer and it's awful. So we're trying to redo her room, and we've been garage sale shopping like crazy. So we got the really cool light fixture at a garage sale, and she is obsessed with Tom Cruise. Don't ask me why. Well, I mean, he is pretty cool. His movies are pretty cool, but personally, don't ask me why.
He's 60.
Yeah, I know. Well, I wanted to marry Norm Macdonald, so we have a thing for older men in our family. Yeah, so we were at a garage sale, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this like framed photo of Tom Cruise when he was younger. It was just calling to us. So we're filling her room with a bunch of different cool things. She got an open sign from some restaurant. She's very eclectic, so there'll be a little bit of everything in there. So we're just doing that right now, and we did it over the weekend. We had some family visiting. My 5-year-old niece was here, and she was playing with Abby, and I was playing in the backyard with them, and we were racing. And so I was, letting them win. I was letting them win.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
And I was a little bit ahead of my 5-year-old niece, and I ran in front of her to like pretend block her. And I didn't know that she wasn't looking ahead of her. She was looking at her nano who was behind her, and her legs got intertwined with mine, and we totally wiped out. And it was embarrassing, and I felt so bad. And we had a lot of ice that day, but that was
Did she make it?
No, she didn't. So that was the most eventful thing.
Taking down your nieces.
Yeah.
At the knees. Taking down your nieces at the knees. Great weekend.
Exactly.
Maybe we shouldn't do weekend updates anymore.
Just preparing them for all the bullying in kindergarten, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what happened with me. Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They produce podcasts, videos, commercials, and marketing plans. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Cool. So should we get into our headlines? There's quite a few headlines. There are quite a few headlines from the past week. So we should probably kick it off. Number one is something that's been dominating Twitter and Facebook and most social media outlets if you are a conservative voter or supporter or follow along. And that is a headline from the 22nd. It was broken. This news story was broke by Rachel Gilmore of Global. And the headline reads, Poilievre's handshake with extremists deserves scrutiny. So basically, Poilievre was at one of his main events, big events. I think this one it was in Alberta. No, it was in Saskatchewan. Where was it? I'm not even sure. Do you guys know? No, Nova Scotia.
I was going to say, I thought it was like in Halifax and Dartmouth. Somewhere in the HRM.
So Poilievre was at an event, one of his big events in Nova Scotia. He does a meet and greet after, so thousands of people line up or hundreds, whatever, and he shook hands with this founder of Diagolon, whose name is Jeremy McKenzie. And so this guy posted on his Telegram account, which he has 13,000 subscribers on Telegram, that he, told Poilievre what's up. And Poilievre said that he was going to, defund the media or whatever. And Rachel Gilmore saw this, tweeted it out. It became a big story. And now the mainstream media is going after him for shaking hands with a white supremacist. Although in my research, it was interesting because, the guy is obviously has issues. He, has a lot of weapons and got arrested on multiple charges with regards to weapons, pointed a gun at a guy's head, kind of incites dissent, especially, anti-government dissent. But I didn't see one instance of like white supremacy, but they just say, he was part of the Coots blockades or he was at the Freedom Convoy, thus he was a white supremacist. So like there's a lot of things to go after this guy about, but I don't understand why maybe I'm missing something, but I don't understand why they're going after him for white supremacy. I don't know if you guys have seen anything about that.
The white supremacy is like the only accusation that still sticks. And like the thing that sucks the most for both the media and Justin Trudeau is that the demand for white supremacists like vastly outstrips the supply. And they desperately want to do what they do in the States where they've actually had an issue with racism. And so they go hunting for it all the time. But like, look, I spent a couple of years researching the alt-right here in Canada. I wrote a lot about it while it was going on because I was really concerned that social conservative voters would, just hear from somebody that they thought had some great great ideas on a life and family issue and vote for them or support them or, tweet about them, not realizing what their other positions were.
Right.
I'd never heard of Diagolon or Jeremy McKenzie. And the only reason that Rachel Gilmore does is because they spend all this time incessantly tracking all of these people in the hopes that they'll do something so they can publish another story about, the white supremacists who are threatening Canada's integrity once again. It's the same as the BS with Pat King, right? With the Freedom Convoy. Everybody's like, do you know who Pat King is? I'm like, no, how do you know who he is right away? Right? Like, just because you happen to follow all these, losers and freaks on social media doesn't mean that the rest of us do. So I don't know. The whole thing just bores me after a while, especially the game Rachel Gilmore plays. She's just a really crappy journalist. And so she'll tweet something that she knows is going to make a bunch of people angry. And they do what people on Twitter do. She's like, oh, I'm being persecuted again. And then all of the journalists pile on and be like, not Rachel Gilmore. She's such a good journalist. Yeah. Like the CTV guy who shows up at the Freedom Convoy, gets a beer can chucked at him, and ends up like he just landed in Fallujah in the midst of the surge. Like, get over yourself.
It's such a nothing burger story, right? Like there are literally thousands of people that Pierre Poilievre has met at his events over the past number of months during the leadership race. Same with Leslie Lewis, in theory, maybe Jean Charest.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly, yeah. Justin Trudeau, this is something that he did really well, going out and meeting people and having his events. And I would say even more so than Pierre Poilievre. We've talked about this because Justin Trudeau actually takes questions from the audience. Now, we might not like his answers. We might find his answers to be canned or perhaps arrogant or something of this nature, but at least he does it. But there's not a whole lot of vetting that goes into that. So it's kind of a little bit high risk, well, I wouldn't even say high risk. Like it's kind of low risk, high reward. But sometimes one of those risks is that you have someone of maybe perhaps a bit of an unsavory character and background come through and attend to your event. But who cares if they attend to your event? That guy could have attended a Justin Trudeau event. That guy could attend a Pierre Poilievre event, a Maxime Bernier event, a Elizabeth May event. Like, it doesn't mean that, like it's so ridiculous and it's such a nothing story. I think it's a, dying days of summer, the dog days of August sort of thing. And not all, but a lot of the journalists on Twitter, kind of just jump all over it. It's slower. We're in between sports seasons, kind of. There's not a whole lot that's happening up. Well, there are things happening out there. It's just a lot of journalists don't, like to report. It's just something nice and easy. And of course, I think they feel threatened by Pierre Poilievre. It looks like he is going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And, I have my issues with him, but they're very focused on a very, I wouldn't say narrow, but few specific policy areas. But listen, he is probably going to be, at least at the beginning, I would imagine, a stronger leader than Aaron O'Toole was, and then that Andrew Scheer was toward the end of his leadership race. So this is something that the media is not used to, and so they're going to be looking for everything to nail to the guy. One thing I'll leave with this is just it's the cognitive dissonance out there amongst the Twitterari, if we want to call them that, amongst the journalists on Twitter, between spending so much time on this essentially nothing story and not covering basically at all the actual racist that was hired by the federal government. The juxtaposition is just extraordinarily rich.
So let's talk about this now. The one thing I do really enjoy about Pierre is his pushback to the media, and I think a lot of people like me also appreciate that. So his response to this particular story, he said, I can't be responsible for Justin Trudeau's many racist outbursts just because I've met him or shaken his hand. And so this does go nicely along with what you were talking about, because the Trudeau government, with specific one of the cabinet ministers who is in charge of Canadian Heritage, gave $133,000 to work as to a specific person to work as an anti-racism trainer. The trainer is named Laith Maroof, and they didn't do, obviously, a background check on this guy because he has a lengthy history for calling for the murder of Jews or for referring to Black people as house slaves, and he even posted a photo of himself flipping the middle finger to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, saying he wished it had millions more names of dead servicemen on it. So This was just a quick Google search from Tristan Hopper, from the National Post, who found out about this guy. And the story gets worse and worse because, then this cabinet minister demanded how this community media advocacy center, the organization that apparently hired Laith Marouf, how they could hire somebody like that. But when you actually go to the organization, the only two people that belong to this organization are Marouf and his wife. So they're just the exclusive consultants of this organization. And then even further from that, Liberal MP Anthony Housefather came out and said that he, for far before this story hit the media, he had been advocating for this guy's firing and begging them to fire Marouf, and it was met with silence. So it was only after the media outcry, only after that, it became apparent that this guy said all these negative, actual racist things, that they took action. But before that, even though they did know this stuff, they were still giving him the money and letting him do his weird work.
Yeah, one thing that I think that for me, and this is a bit of a tangent, that is the story has revealed itself is right at the end of all this, Alyssa, when you mentioned that Anthony Housefather had brought this up. And it's my understanding that Anthony Housefather is a Jewish member of parliament, and he represents a very Jewish part of the island of Montreal. And it's another example of, Anthony Housefather wouldn't exactly be a backbencher per se, but is another example of Liberal members of parliament within caucus that are responding probably to where the public mostly is over the past, I would say, 6 months, or at least certainly in 2022, that have offered pushback. And the government is kind of late to the game to actually implement the change that they're requesting. But there's a couple other examples. It's my understanding that it was about close to 40 Quebec Liberal MPs were the ones that were very, very, very wary of implementing and passing the motion to implement the provisions within the Emergencies Act. Right before that vote in the House of Commons occurred in February, the government had announced that it would be a matter of confidence, because I believe at least, my theory is that they were concerned that they weren't going to have enough Liberal MPs to vote for it. And if you have, 35 or 40 Liberal MPs from Quebec vote against that motion would have failed in the House, albeit by a small margin, but would have failed nonetheless. Then when you have the lifting of the vaccine mandates for traveling and for federal civil servants, that occurred earlier in the spring. And again, it was because of a lot of backbench Liberal MPs kind of pushing back. And then now again, a third time within 2022, you have Liberal MPs, some kind of sort of backbench MPs, but members of caucus nonetheless, again, pushing the government. So it's interesting that how at least I see, and again, this is a little tangential, but we're seeing a bit of a pattern here where there's a lot of Liberal MPs that seem to be in a different place than where Justin Trudeau and a lot of his advisors, whether it be in the PMO or the PCO or within cabinet, are compared to where they are. And I'm wondering, is that rift going to be reconciled a little bit, or is that rift going to kind of open up more and more and more as we go further? I mean, one quick thing is that there was redistribution of the ridings in Ontario. So every 10 years in Canada, you have to redistribute the ridings, the federal ridings in the House of Commons based upon that 10-year census. So we had a census in 2021. They have the commissions in the different provinces to come up with different boundaries. So the city of Toronto proper is actually losing a seat because during COVID, they lost something like 60,000 people. And the seat that the Boundary Commission basically recommended to get rid of was John McKay's down in Scarborough-Gilwood. So the reason I'm saying this is because he would be kind of, I would imagine, behind closed doors, one of those kind of backbench Liberal MPs trying to push against the government and get them to row maybe in a more reasonable direction. So I thought that was also an interesting thing to come out of this. Besides the hypocrisy of, the political left and calling, Pierre Poliver a racist for a nothing story, they actually spent money and hired a racist to do anti-racism. And it took basically several members of their caucus to tell them to stop doing that.
I just find it so hilarious that it's the Quebec MPs because they're totally fine with locking you down after 10 p.m., but the Emergencies Act is too far.
Well, this will be interesting, though, because on Sunday is going to be the first day the writs are issued for the provincial election in Quebec. And up until probably, I would say a year and a half ago, it looked like the Coalition Avenir de Quebec, the CAQ, the CAQ as it's known, which is in power now with a massive majority, was going to get an even larger majority. But now that's in question. Like, it's not in question that they'll win a majority. It's in question that they will increase more seats because Eric Tehem, who is basically like a talk radio host, I think from the Quebec City region, became leader of the Quebec Conservateur, the provincial conservative party in Quebec, which has actually skyrocketed in the polls during all the restrictions. So something's happening in Quebec. Good thing that none of the three of us can speak French and go in there and find out exactly what's happening on the ground.
All right, so moving on to the second biggest story. I mean, I think this is probably bigger than the Pierre story, but less to do with us, is the firing of Lisa LaFlamme. And she was, so the headline in CBC, Lisa LaFlamme blindsided by cancellation of contract with CTV. Basically, she posted a video on Twitter and then spoke later saying that they let her go because of her gray hair. They also said that she had clashed with Michael Melling, who is her new boss, over spending on foreign coverage and other issues. I think she wanted to do more coverage in Ukraine and other places. And so she's being replaced. And there's been a huge media outcry from the mainstream media over this. So it's sort of, to me, like the left eating their own. It's this is happening time and time again. And it's sort of like, where do older women fall in that woke hierarchy of like who should be hired for news or other, mainstream stations. So I don't know what you guys think, but I kind of thought it was funny because it reminded me of when Peter Mansbridge stepped down and then he was replaced by like 2 women and 2 non-white people, non-white men. And it was like, and people are calling out that it takes 4 people to do the job of 1 white man. But it was just like the woke hierarchy of what they think in their mind should be like replaced with and who should have the top spots now.
There was a few angles that I thought were interesting. The first was reading CTV's original story on the firing. She had like released a video where she's like, I got fired and now I'm basically shooting a video that looks like a ISIS hostage video, in my basement to explain what happened to me because I can't get back into the office and I have no crew anymore. And then CTV was like, she has been released to elsewhere, like she's got this article that doesn't mention she'd been fired, just that she had moved on. And so like I'd actually posed that question, like reading CTV's version of the events makes you wonder what they leave out of their other coverage, right? Like it just so obviously not at all what happened, and the context is incredibly important, right? Like it's saying that somebody passed away peacefully is different than saying that they got euthanized.
Yeah.
And the context really matters there. The second thing that's interesting, which is just a broader comment on the media overall, is that there's a lot of older guard journalists like Lisa LaFlamme who want to actually do more in-depth coverage, but there's just not much of an appetite for that kind of coverage anymore in a lot of places. And so you've got the big money guys who are like, these stories don't sell. And so we basically have to just pander to advertisers. We have to trawl for rage clicks, whether that's, progressive rage clicks because, rainbow flag somewhere got its, like somebody squealed their tires on a rainbow crosswalk or something, right? That's going to get, everybody in the LGBT crowd outraged, or a freedom convoy story on the other side. And when you have a really complex conflict, like what's going on in Ukraine, where you actually do need to put people on the ground who either speak the language or have a translator and kind of research what's happening. Yeah, a lot of them, people they're just not willing to sink money into that anymore. So I actually thought that was an interesting angle to the story, because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm trying to figure out some of these bigger issues when they start up and I go hunting, there's very few publications left that actually give you really in-depth, useful reportage on these issues. And in the absence of useful reportage, you end up getting conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I found it. I think there is a... I guess this is just the train of thought I'm on this week. I think there's a pattern of behavior with Bell Media, because Bell Media owns CTV. So when this occurred, and I watched the video, I immediately got a hold of a few contacts of mine, a few friends of mine who are in legacy media that are females, because I wanted to ask them, like, to me, this is quite obvious, what occurred. And this is before a lot of the information was out. And like you said, Jonathan, like there's a lot of information that still isn't out there that I think a lot of us would like to know. First off, like, I don't really know Lisa LaFlamme's politics, and I think that's a good thing. Like, she just reads the news. The news might be written and edited in such a way that's presented in a specific light on certain issues, but like I don't know her personal politics, so that's a good thing. To me, that's a sign of a good journalist, because if I know your personal politics, then really you're a columnist, not a journalist. Secondly, they got back to me and they said, oh yeah, it's becoming increasingly a joke. Bell's Let's Talk Day, I think it's in January, right, for mental health. There's increasingly more and more former Bell employees that are online that make fun of it. I've noticed that for the past couple of years, and now next year is going to be a complete and utter disaster. You saw something similar happen to Wendy Mesley with CBC a year or two ago. Now this has happened to Lisa LaFlamme. I don't think it's necessarily disconnected, but I'm not saying it's for sure connected. You see someone like Sarah Oleski, who's with TSN. TSN is the sports network, is also owned by Bell Media. She's been covering CFL and the Winnipeg Jets since the Jets went back to Manitoba over 10 years ago, and she recently just left Bell Media, TSN, to go and work exclusively for the Winnipeg Jets, basically around the same time. So I don't know, something seems weird about CTV and the way that they treat their journalists, especially their female journalists. I mean, even Alyssa, you're a big fan of the Jay and Dan podcast. Like, look what happened to Dan, right? Like, that's
and he's a female white
woman,
so
yeah. He might identify that way.
But as an older white woman, how do you feel about all this, Alyssa?
Well, it's funny, we all have different takes, because I think it's like a woke thing. Like, you have to have everybody on like a certain spectrum, and it's solely because of like race or gender or whatever. And if you fall below somebody, then you're gonna get fired or move on or whatever. Jonathan thinks it's because of the coverage issue, because people don't have an interest in media, in-depth media reporting, and Scott thinks it's a female thing, and maybe it's a little bit of all three.
Yeah, it's probably confluence.
It probably is.
Yeah.
So. The other thing is, I think like is the appetite for these hosts that are they're the face of it, and again they don't possess any intersectionality credit, as you pointed out. They get paid a lot of money, right? It's probably a lot cheaper to just cancel her contract and bring on somebody else, and as long as they're gay or non-white or transgender or something, everybody's going to praise your decision, and it's going to cost you half as much money.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we'll leave it at that, and we'll see how the next anchor does. And as long as he's not a older white woman like myself, he should be fine. All right. Edmonton Journal, the next headline: UCP membership doubles ahead of fall leadership vote. So right now in Alberta, there's a leadership race happening after Jason Kenney stepped down after a leadership review, which only earned him, I believe, 51% of the vote. So the membership went from 60,000 to over 123,000. Which I also found really funny, because the headline that juxtaposed this was that the Alberta Liberal Party had canceled its leadership race because no one stepped up to take the job. So that's what's happening here in Alberta. I have a lot to say about this leadership race. Probably will happen in a different podcast, but your general thoughts.
Well, it's kind of interesting to me. I'm wondering if a lot of so Alyssa, out of curiosity, the 60,000 to the 123,000. What is the comparison? Like, what timeline is that? Is that between over the last year, the last couple of years?
Right.
What is that? Because if it's over the last year or more, then I think the reason for it is because there's a lot of people that want to sign up new members, so who'd be eligible to vote against Jason Kenney in the leadership review. I think there was 30,000 people that cast a ballot there, which is probably fewer than who would have all the way through, because originally it was supposed to be an in-person special meeting that was supposed to happen at Red Deer. The building could only hold 2,000 people at a time, and there was something like over 10,000 people had registered to vote. So the vote was delayed by about a month and a half. So I think more than 30,000 people have voted. So I'm wondering how many people were motivated to vote out Jason Kenney specifically over his handling of COVID-19 and the restrictions in the province of Alberta that may or may not be as interested in voting for the next leader. Like, I don't know, like, I'm not in Alberta. Like, I did go to visit for a little bit this summer. Jonathan, I think you were there a little bit earlier this summer. And Alyssa, you're there on the ground. It seems to me like someone like Brian Jean, this is happening all over again to him, because it kind of happened to him last time. You know, he was kind of utilized by a lot of people who want to get rid of Jason Kenney, both like actual organizers and I think people, just regular party members, regular Albertans, as like, oh, well, he could be the next leader, and so this will be someone instead of Jason. But now that the leadership race has actually started and we're into it, it does seem to become increasingly between Danielle Smith and Travis Taves and Brian Jean, who will still probably do well. Like, he'll still probably be in the top 3, top 4. Seems to be less and less of a concern. And so that would suggest to me is that even though there's been basically a doubling of the membership, I would be curious if there is a relatively high turnout rate for those people voting in the leadership race. As a quick aside, in the Conservative leadership race, I was talking to a few friends of mine on the different campaigns, and as of the beginning of this week, as of Sunday evening or Monday morning, less than 40% of eligible members in the Conservative Party of Canada had cast in their ballots. As of we're recording today, this is the last day to send your ballots in the regular mail. Will actually be received by September 6th by the auditors for the leadership race. So, you know, if that race is that, it can't garner that much of a turnout rate with people like, you know, Pierre Poliver and Jean Charest and Leslyn Lewis running, I can't see the Alberta race garnering any more of an interest proportionately with the slate of candidates they have running. I don't know if that's what you guys are hearing on the ground, but that seems to be kind of my sense of it.
Well, let me ask you something, Jonathan, because this is something that I have to deal with every single day here, being in Alberta, with our supporters, with people I know who are mostly social conservatives, that a lot of people, so it's very interesting because we have two front runners in Danielle Smith and Travis Taves, and Travis is associated with Jason Kenney, that he is being dragged along with him in terms of how he handled the pandemic, despite the fact that Travis is pro-life. He says he wants to, you know, take away the stigma of that politically. He has pro-life policies. He's very upfront about that. And then you have that versus Danielle Smith, who's sort of like a Polyev type character in the fact that she is against mandates, against lockdowns, you know, is seen as that like freedom candidate, but also is not a social conservative. So much so that she sort of falls in line with like Roman Baber, is in the fact that when we talked to him, he was like, I'm so pro-choice. I want to respect people's freedom over bodily autonomy when it comes to vaccines and when it comes to abortion. So that's how they view this issue. But a lot of social conservatives are choosing Danielle Smith because of that position, because of the anti-vaccine, anti-mandate, anti-lockdown position over the pro-life policies and the pro-life position of Travis Taves, even though it's very clear and pointed out, and that she is not a winnable candidate because she, you know, handed over an election in 2012, which she was winning up until the last week. She's flip-flopped on a bunch of issues, including conscience rights issues. You know, it's easy to talk about the pandemic when you're a radio talk show host and not actually in government or elected. And all these things are repeatedly pointed out to these people, but it doesn't matter. She's their savior. This is what's going to happen in Alberta. This is what needs to happen in Alberta so that there's no more mandates and no more lockdowns. It's sort of kind of trumping social conservative issues, and I mean, as a side, you know, Travis isn't like, I'm going to, you know, restrict all abortions, or this strong, like, Leslyn Lewis type candidate, but he's still far superior to her.
He opposes killing babies in the womb. Like, that's what the pro-life position is. This one drives me insane. Just like all the conservative voters who are putting Pierre first over the freedom position. At the end of the day, there's the sad fact that a lot of people give more of a shit about having to wear a mask into the shell than they do about babies getting killed in the womb. And that is just true. I have seen people on your social media who spent years trashing Right Now for supporting imperfect but pro-life candidates, who are now voting for Pierre, who supports abortion all the way through, has from a social conservative perspective, his voting record is just awful, right? And what I think we are finding out is that a lot of people care a lot more about being personally inconvenienced than they do about actually voting for an ethically consistent candidate. And the reason I say that is because in the federal race, Leslyn Lewis is and was better on the freedom issue than Pierre is, and Travis Taves is also better than Danielle Smith on all those issues. And so what you have a lot of people that are in there for red meat. They're angry and they're frustrated because their lives in many places were like either hugely inconvenienced and things like that, and now they're backing a candidate who is objectively untrustworthy. Like Danielle Smith crossed the floor, right? Like literally just like kind of destroyed the Wild Rose Party and joined the PCs, who are like the red Tories, and now she's the red meat candidate, right? The real true blue conservative. It's just bewildering to me. People have like a 15-minute long memory. Same thing with Brian Jean. When Patrick Brown, Danielle Smith, and Brian Jean were all running at the same time, I'm like, is this Night of the Living Dead? Like, why are all of these people back again? Right? Like I can't take Brian Jean seriously because one, he flip-flops on everything, and two, he kind of looks exactly like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes if he grew up and didn't age very well. That's kind of what he looks like. But he went on TV when he was the leader of the Wild Rose saying SoCons are nut jobs and we need to cut them out of the party. Now he's courting SoCons. Now, fair enough. I suppose it's a compliment that he's courting SoCons, but the idea that he's trustworthy is just crazy. So I am so sick of social conservatives who are willing to completely throw all of their principles under the bus to vote for candidates that are more than happy to grift them. It drives me crazy.
Now, I will say, like, in these conversations that I have with people, I think they would really take offense to the term personally inconvenienced, because they talk about, a lot of the things that they went through during the pandemic as trauma. Like, they actually say they've been through trauma. Some people have been, fired and poverty because of the mandates,
with the exception of the people that got fired, though. I don't put it this way: none of the people that I've talked to have lost their jobs. In fact, a lot of them are doing just fine, especially in rural areas. So, with a big glaring exception for those who went through what you said they did, which is if they lost their job or were impoverished, that's obviously genuine trauma. The rest of us did not go through genuine trauma. That is not the case. It sucked. A lot of it did. There were those of us like a funeral that I had to go to for a family member was only allowed to have a handful of people. Like these were terrible things, but it's not the same thing. And if we want to talk about trauma, it doesn't feel great to have your arms pulled off by forceps and your brain suctioned out either. And so let's just put first things first is all I'm saying. Yeah. And then on top of that, it's still no excuse because Leslyn Lewis is better on those issues and came out on them first. Travis Taves is good on these issues too.
Yeah, and I will say Travis isn't like, I support the government's response to the pandemic. He has said there were problems, no more lockdowns, no vaccine mandates. Like this is my campaign promise. So it's not like he's on the complete other side of this issue. It's just that they don't trust him because he was finance minister. Like it doesn't make any sense to me, and it's like a constant battle that I have to endure through our supporters. But go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's interesting because at the beginning of, and I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'll do it again. I'll be quick about it. So at the beginning of the federal conservative leadership race, we did a survey amongst our supporters in our Right Now database. If you're a member of the party or intend to becoming a member of the party, or let's pretend you are a member of the party, how do you plan on filling out your ballot, right? And so we did our first survey at the beginning of February, like days after Aaron O'Toole lost the leadership. I think I even made that survey while Aaron was still technically leader, because I knew we were in the dying hours of his leadership at that point. Anyway, so we sent it out at the beginning of February, and when we did, the results came back, and it was something like 53% of Right Now supporters intended to put Leslyn Lewis as number one, and 45% Pierre Poliver as number one. So a very, very small margin in between. And then as the campaign went on for the leadership, and especially through the month of May, when there was about 3 or 4 different, especially in English, debates where Pierre was asked about his position specifically on abortion and his voting record, and he said multiple times, I am pro-abortion all the way through, despite, what used to be a pro-life voting record. Now this is where I am. We let our people know that. We didn't twist any words. We just presented it for what it was. We did the same question, the same survey, more or less to the same people, like to our database again, toward the end of May and beginning of June. And then in that survey, over 85% said they were putting Leslyn 1, and less than 15%, it was something like 12 or 13%, said they were putting Pierre as number 1. And so I just get a feeling, and I'm not saying that we are like the solution to all this or the antidote per se, but I'm wondering, like, if you took all the members of the Conservative Party of Canada who are pro-life, and put them into our database so they could actually get these emails and get these communications and get this information, frankly, I wonder if we would have a bit of a different leadership race. And I wonder the same in Alberta. That's an advantage of our organizations, that we're actually able to get the information out there. Alyssa, you do a phenomenal job at getting the clips and the graphics and all that in an easy to digest way. And I'm not saying that we're able to, kind of convert everyone and bring them back to first things first. As Jonathan's saying, that's evidenced by the fact that we still have, 12 to 15% of our database who intends to put Pierre Poliver over Leslyn Lewis, despite that they are pro-life. And there are people who are doing that and who respond to the survey who, give us money every month, who have worked in the pro-life movement full-time in the past, which is just incredibly shocking to me on both ends, but whatever. That's what happens when you have, a larger database. You're going to have a variety of opinions that way. But I am curious, like, if that information were actually disseminated out there to pro-life members of the United Conservative Party of Alberta or the Conservative Party of Canada, if in both cases there'd be a bit of a different leadership race happening, because we were able to change things, at least for our supporters.
Well, I don't know, because if you look at all the pro-life organizations that are involved in the UCP leadership race, you have the Wilberforce Project, you have Alberta Pro-Life, Campaign Life Coalition to a certain extent, and us. And all of us, besides Campaign Life Coalition, have said to put that Travis Taves and Todd Loewen are the pro-life candidates, and the others are not pro-life. With the exception of Campaign Life, who says only Todd Loewen is pro-life for some reason. Only Todd is pro-life. So the information is out there for pro-life supporters in Alberta. And even when I specifically had these conversations, which I do in like different chats with large groups of social conservatives, I would say half of them say they don't care about that Travis is the pro-life candidate and Danielle is not pro-life, because they'll justify it in 1,000 different ways. Well, you're forcing us, if you're forcing vaccine mandates, those have fetal, cells in them. And so that's not pro-life. And they'll try and twist and turn and justify. And Danielle said she apologized for crossing the floor, so it's okay now. And they'll give every inch of leeway to Danielle Smith for all the history of stuff that she's done for the last decade. But they won't give any leeway to Travis, who is a fairly new politician and, has the right positions on a lot of these issues, both socially conservative and in terms of the lockdown. So it's definitely a battle. The pandemic has been interesting for social conservative groups in a variety of ways. And this is one of the biggest struggles that I'm finding here in Alberta. And it's, kudos to Danielle Smith for having good comms and getting these people on board who should not be on board with her.
Well, in Alberta, I really think, too, that what you have is there's a lot of people that are just feeling vengeful. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people, like, you hear how they talk about Jason Kenney. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I disagreed with the way Jason Kenney handled a bunch of stuff. But the idea that he was suddenly like a flaming commie now, who wanted to lock everybody in their homes forever rather than somebody under immense pressure, mm-hmm. who made promises he shouldn't have and then caved when he shouldn't have, and had terrible comms on all of it. But the idea that somebody who had a perfect pro-life voting record all the way through, bucked Stephen Harper when nobody else was willing to, Harper whipped the cabinet. He still voted for Motion 312, as you guys will all remember. Like, the idea that on an issue of second principles we disagreed with him, and now he's garbage. Like, this is just straight up vengeful. And that's what I think a lot of people's reaction to Travis is too, is because Kenny's leaving, they're just transferring all their negative energy to Travis. And I don't have any respect for it. And I think it's gross. Like, I really don't have any sympathy for the people who are backing the candidates who are objectively hostile to everything we care about, especially in Alberta, where 22 Christian schools would have been shut down if the NDP had won.
Yeah.
Like, these are not small stakes.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't want to go, we can talk about the UCP leadership, but it's interesting too in the 2012 election, because it was because of the schooling issue that Danielle Smith rose in the polls. And then the week before the election, she kept getting hounded by Alison Redford about social conservative issues. And so she was forced to say, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro this, everything progressive, and then tanked in the polls and then lost the election and then blamed it because the Wild Rose had too many SoCons and fringe candidates. And it's like, you guys don't remember this? Like, why do you think that anything will change?
No, they don't.
So anyway, on that note, we will take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the NHS, the UK, and Boston Children's Hospital. So stay tuned.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larosmedia.com
And be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
And we're back. So our final headline for this week's podcast is that the National Health Services in the UK closed a child gender identity clinic. And this happened for a variety of reasons. Some people say that it was because of the wait times were too long and there's problems with the administration and the hospital. But then others took them to court, like a former patient who went to court saying she had not been challenged enough about her decision at 16 to take drugs that began her transition from female to male, a decision she later regretted. There was a report that came out from a doctor named Dr. Cass who said that there was a lack of understanding about why the type of patients the clinic was seeing was changing, that there were more female to male patients and more autistic children that were having these gender reassignment surgeries. So that was drastically influencing their decision-making as well. Now, Jonathan, I know you've done a lot of research on this. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about why you think this clinic is closing, and will it reopen, or do you think this is like a good sign for this issue in the UK?
So I want to be as succinct as possible, but I also want to emphasize that this is a really important development. So you've got the Tavistock Clinic, which has been targeted for years by those who suspect that they've been rushing children into gender transition without doing any of the proper work. I, of course, don't think children can transition, but even those who support the idea that some should be transitioned thought that Tavistock was being sloppy. Now, it's actually far more significant that this report by the doctor you referred to came out than it is that Tavistock is closing. Tavistock is closing just in time to be sued by what we think is going to be roughly 1,000 families and counting in a class action lawsuit that's basically going to accuse them of doing irreversible damage to their children. This means double mastectomies for young developing girls. It means puberty blockers that have permanently destroyed the fertility and sexual function of many of these children. It essentially means that things have been done to them which can never be undone and were done to them before they could vote, drink, or drive. Right? So this is a really big deal. But one of the most significant parts of the report, because it had never been said before, is that this report, which was actually commissioned by the National Health Service, stated that one of the things that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones were doing to young people was affecting their brain function. Now, we've known for a long time about the way it distends, distorts, and deforms genitals. We've known for quite a long time that it reduces bone density. We've known all of these different things, right? It causes biological biological females to grow beards. It destroys often their ability to orgasm or to have children. Now imagine how angry these kids are, 18, 19, 20, 21, realizing that never for the rest of their life will they be able to have a child or experience sexual pleasure with an intimate partner. And that decision was made for them by adults whom they trusted in a clinical setting, right? So this new information that says it even affects their brain function, which is, of course, where they reason from, I think is a really big deal. So there's all these individual little clinics that are going to replace Tavistock. So it's not like the ability of people to actually get transition it has been removed, but it's a really big deal because the report is incredibly damning. It's a really big deal because this class action lawsuit, especially if it succeeds, I think is going to spread around the world. America is next. That's the belly of the beast in many ways in terms of gender ideology. And you're going to see doctors suddenly terrified to prescribe cross-sex hormones or to rush children onto transition when they could get sued for permanently destroying a young person. Sue all these people into the ground, take their careers, empty their bank accounts. They've destroyed thousands of kids and they deserve everything they get.
Well, this is already happening in the United States with the Boston Clinic, right? The Boston Children's Hospital, where I was just reading a report from about a week ago where they've taken off a bunch of information of the stuff that they do or have done in the past with children as young as, I think, 8 years old, transitioning surgically and chemically within their clinic, within the hospital. They've taken all that information off of their website. Lots and lots of text off the website because I think they're very concerned. They're looking across the pond at the United Kingdom and they're very concerned of what's happening. It's kind of weird to me that this whole phenomenon of gender dysphoria, especially when it results in surgical and chemical transitions, especially amongst children, those who are minors, seem to be really a big issue in the Anglosphere, not so much even if you go to like continental Europe, like places like France or Spain or Sweden. It's not really as much of an issue there as it is like in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom. But here in Canada too, like people are waking up. It's kind of funny. People are waking up to wokeism. We see in the United States, there was a school board recently in the state of Wisconsin that said that no more BLM, no more pride flags, like none of this at all. In my hometown in Brandon, for example, there has been pushback at parents in public schools saying, we don't want all of, they're not saying that we don't want any of it. They're just saying we don't want all of what you're offering to our children in terms of gender ideology and all this type of sexuality type of stuff in our classrooms. So, for example, instead of having a Pride Day at one of the schools back home in Brandon, they had a Rainbow Day. So, like, that might not sound like a huge difference, but it's like a first step back that I'm aware of to, like, some sort of sense of reasonableness within public schools in my hometown. And, you know, the parents were behind it of this change. There was pressure from the LGBT community. I would say the LGBT like elite community, because there's a lot of people I know who would identify as part of that community that don't necessarily identify with all the organizations that are pushing all this stuff. I mean, Twitter the other day got rid of what's that? Gays Against Groomers? Is that the account that I'm thinking of? Yeah. So like there's pushback even within the community. And then even in Canada, you know, there's a couple of provinces that are coming up this autumn where they have municipal elections, including elections to both public and Catholic school boards. And you have parents, people I know, like I'm not doing this personally, but I know of people who are putting together organizations to compete in these elections, to run candidates, to get them elected to these school boards specifically on this number one issue amongst a few other issues. So it's interesting to me, like Jonathan, I think you know I've talked about this in the past, how, you know, this is the train stop where a lot of people in the public get off the train, so to speak. We've seen a lot of change in our society over the last, 50, 60, 70 years, change that we haven't seen since probably the time of like the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire in terms of like society and its sexual mores. But this does really seem to be genuinely like where people are getting off the train.
what's
And I'll make
interest-
one. Yeah, go ahead, listen.
I'm just going to comment that when these groups are forming to run people in the school board elections and the municipal elections, it is nonpartisan. It's conservatives and liberals coming together, who were even previously elected to come together against this. So it's not just like a certain group of particular people. It's people that cross the spectrum.
Yeah, real quick, Jonathan, before we get to your point, because I just want to shore up Alyssa's comment there, because I was talking to a few people last week in Toronto because they're running a slate of candidates, and I was talking to a few people in British Columbia as well. And the people in Toronto includes former Liberal members of Parliament who were in the House of Commons not that long ago, relatively speaking. Certainly before the time of Justin Trudeau, but not much before that. So
They've transitioned.
Yeah, they've transitioned. That's right. But in a way they haven't, because the Liberal Party has transitioned away from them. Like they're in the same place they have always been. And they still identify like ideologically as a liberal. It's just that the Liberal Party of Canada under Justin Trudeau probably collectively no longer ideologically identifies as a liberal. They identify as something completely and utterly different. But anyway, I just wanted to shore up Alyssa's point there. Please go ahead, Jonathan, with your point.
I just want to tie this back to the previous discussion before Alyssa puts a bow on this, because if anybody listened to the description of what gender transition does and was horrified and can't believe we're doing this to kids, and then heard Scott's point, which is, of course, that the public is not on board with this stuff and are horrified when they find out, I'd like everyone to keep in mind that candidates like Danielle Smith and Pierre do not care about this issue, will not speak to this issue, and Pierre voted for the conversion therapy ban twice that actually would make it illegal for therapists, pastors, and parents to encourage their daughters or their sons into being comfortable with their own sex or gender. So this is a really big deal. Like the reason it frustrates me so much that people are willing to sell out in first principles is because what we are talking about is brave freedom candidates who will not speak up when children are being destroyed, either physically in the womb or by this dangerous ideology that they are more than willing to pander to. And in Pierre's case and Danielle's case, they have the record to prove it. They have the record to prove that they will not only not stand up for these children, but will vote objectively for legislation that prevents children with gender dysphoria from getting help. So if you listen to all this and you still think that those candidates are a good move, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and I will put a bow on this just by talking specifically about an article that I read at the Post Millennial, where they highlighted a TikTok user who is a biological woman who's speaking out about a surgery that she had and how it ruined her life. And I just want to highlight this just so that you know exactly what we're talking about. So this TikTok user had a phalloplasty, which she said ruined her life. She started this procedure in March 2020, and she's not even halfway through the process, so over 2 years. She's undergone 12 surgeries in the past 2 years due to complications arising from the procedure, including a fistula and a colostomy bag at the age of 27. She's reminded of her surgery every day when she looks at her arm because it involves taking the skin, fat, nerves, arteries, and veins from your wrist to about halfway up your forearm to create a penis. And at this Boston Children's Hospital, there was a recent study that came out that said that this hospital performed 177 chest surgeries, and that 36.7% of those surgeries were on patients younger than 18. They also performed 27 genital surgeries, including 5 vaginoplasties, so similar to these phalloplasties. So this is the type of stuff that we're talking about. My sister is 15 years old right now. I can't even begin to fathom her making that decision and not regretting it later on and going through that pain, especially if it lasts for 2 years, and being in a colostomy bag when you're supposed to be a young, healthy, young adult, just starting off their life. So this is incredibly serious, like you both have mentioned, and it's very serious politically. This is not just happening in the United States, the United Kingdom. This is happening in Canada as well. So we have to be aware, and we have to prepare to vote for candidates who will stand up to this, because it's absolutely insane.
Or at least not support it.
Yeah. Absolutely. At the very minimum, please don't support ruining children's lives.
Yeah, if you can support, children not having the ability to forever genitally mutilate themselves, and if you can support not killing little girls in the womb because they're girls, like that would be great. Like if we could all
Pretty
agree
low
on,
bar.
yeah, if everyone listening to this podcast can agree on that, and you can make your votes, whether it's in leadership races or nominations or general elections based on those like criteria, we're going to go pretty far. But if you're just going to capitulate, because, and I agree with the frustration. Like I don't want to take a vaccine passport to go to, the Bombers game or to go to a restaurant or to fly or whatever. And frankly, I couldn't because I didn't qualify. I'm unclean. I get it. I get the frustration. Believe me. But my first and foremost reason for casting my vote is: do you support, protecting life in the womb, and then at the end of the natural life cycle as well? And a very, very, very close second would be do you support protecting children from these crazy monstrous ideologies being purported not just in public schools, but unfortunately specifically in Ontario Catholic schools as well. So if we could just
use your vote to defend children, not yourself.
Yeah, spoken like a true father.
Yeah. All right. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about the things we like and the things we hate.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
All right, so we're back and we're going to wrap up this podcast with things we like and things we hate.
Things we like and things we hate.
So let's start off with Scott. What is one of the things that you like this week?
One of the things I like this week is literally happening right now as we're speaking. We're having company over tonight, and I'm doing for the second time in my life a nice 15-pound brisket. And it's been on there since early this morning. I got back late last night, like 2 a.m. or whatever from Ottawa. I got up at like 7 a.m. to start working on this brisket. It's a nice cherry wood smoke with a little rub that includes both coffee and a little bit of cocoa, because that helps bring up the beefiness of beef. And the bark was looking real good before we started doing this podcast. So that's something I'm really liking so far. I'll let you know next week what the result was.
Every week that when we do, or like every time we do things that we like and things we hate, Scott either has a story about the Blue Bombers or meat. So,
or like some like pornographic description of making his supper.
Yeah.
Rated explicit.
It is, exactly. All right, Jonathan, things you like.
I just started reading a novel again for a change. I went to the cottage for a couple of days last week, so I'm reading the Sigrid Undset's Kristen Lavransdatter, which sounds a lot more complex than it is. It's a trilogy based in the Middle Ages in Norway, and it's one of the best historical trilogies I've ever read. It's phenomenal. It's one of those things where like it doesn't sound like daily life in the Middle Ages would be interesting, and I started reading it, and I put away 200 pages without getting up, so it's phenomenal.
Well, mine's even more intellectual than that. What I really like this week is the movie Signs from M. Night Shyamalan.
Have you not seen it before?
I have seen it. Have you seen it, Jonathan?
Okay. No.
Did you say no?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, put away that dang book and watch Signs. Come on. Yeah, my sister hadn't seen it, so we watched it, and I just remembered how good it was. It sort of reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock style suspense, and until you get to a certain part, the CGI is crappy, but it's a really good movie. So
that's Mel Gibson, right?
Mel Gibson, Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
Mel Gibson's actually a reverend or a former reverend in the movie, so it's interesting.
Just like real life.
All right, things you hate, Scott.
going back to my type, as per Alyssa, Nathan Rourke's injury. So for those who don't know, Nathan Rourke is a young Canadian quarterback who's just been absolutely lighting it up on the field. He's originally from Vancouver, plays for his hometown team, the BC Lions. It's very, very rare in professional football in that position in quarterback to have a Canadian. Like the last time there was a Canadian quarterback in either league that was doing this well, you have to go back to like the 60s. So, he was this great story, and then he got a specific sprain that he has to get surgery on, and it's going to be many weeks and months. He might be back at the end of the regular season, but probably not. And that just really sucks, and I hate it. I hate to see anyone get injured in sports, even guys I really, really dislike, guys like Brad Marchand and people like that.
Oh, no, that's amazing. It's so fun to watch them get hurt.
No, I still hate it. But this one really, really sucks. And I say that as a Bombers fan, and the BC Lions are right behind the Bombers challenging for the West. And it would have been really cool because the last 2 games of the regular season is back-to-back games between the Bombers and the Lions. So if they both had basically similar records, the last 2 games of the season would have mattered. And that would have been really cool.
Now I don't even have to go to Jonathan to ask him what things he hates, because it was just what you said, right?
I hate how long Scott takes. Like maybe if the vaccine mandates come back, you can't go to games and we'll stop talking about them. No, the easiest thing is, honestly, it's kind of because I was thinking anyways. So I'm surprised we talked about it so much. What I actually hate during this period where there's all these races going on is people selling out principles they used to claim were important to them for secondary issues. It really does drive me nuts, as those of you who have made it this far in the podcast might have noticed.
Yeah. Okay, the thing I hate is Steven Spielberg.
Like the man?
The man. I do not like Steven Spielberg anymore. And did you know this, Jonathan and Scott, obviously, but I think Jonathan wrote about this, that he gave $25,000 against the Kansas abortion vote, the referendum, and his wife also gave $25,000. So between the two of them, $50,000. And I have to look up here. I had it written down about how much was actually spent. It was an astronomical amount that they spent to get their way out with this referendum here.
So I guess you have to stop watching Spielberg movies and just go straight back to Mel Gibson movies.
It's so sad. But yeah, and kudos though, I will say. Here we go. So yeah, they spent. Abortion rights advocates together spent more than $22 million on a ballot question on this abortion ballot question in Kansas, which they ended up winning. And Spielberg contributed to the effort. And on the anti-abortion side, the Roman Catholic Diocese and the Kansas Catholic Conference contributed more than $4 million. Could you imagine that happening here in Canada?
That's really cool.
Yeah. So anyway, just an interesting, maybe we can talk about that next time to find out sort of what happened there. But yeah, Steven Spielberg is no longer on my good list. So on that note, we will end there.
Wait, what list are Jonathan and I on? Are we on the good list or the bad list?
TBD.
Okay.
Sometimes the good, sometimes the bad, mostly the bad. But thank you for joining us, everybody. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Went through the headlines. Thanks, Jonathan, for taking some time out to join us. And hopefully we'll have you on very soon to talk more about a lot of these pressing issues. You could find Jonathan. What's your Twitter handle again? At J Van Maren. J Van Maren. He has a Substack. Mm-hmm. He has a podcast. Just promo yourself, Jonathan.
Just go to thebridgehead.ca. Everything is there.
All right. And for us, you can find us at Right Now HQ, or go on to find our podcast at thestinkingalbatross.ca. And we had a great time doing this podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.